What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. So today I'm bringing to you my ban list predictions for the March 2021 format. Can you believe it's already time for another ban list? I mean, it's been almost a year since the COVID pandemic started, and here we are yet again, another ban list gone by. In-person events have still not really come back to fruition, although I don't expect that to be the case for several more months. Hopefully we can get back to that soon, but it's ban list season, baby, and of course we have to discuss predictions. We did ban list roulette yesterday, so if you want to see the more satirical take on this video, I'd highly recommend checking that out, but let's go ahead and get straight into the predictions. Now, typically when people do their ban list predictions, they fall into either one of two categories. It either falls into predictions that they think are going to be the most accurate, or it's going to be what they feel to be are the best predictions for the game itself. Sometimes it falls a little bit in between, and so while I am going to inject my own subjective opinion in here, I'm going to have this lean more towards what I think Konami is going to do, because I think that's the most conducive to the discussion. So starting off with the bans, I've got True King of all calamities going to 0. This is a bit of an odd one, because if you ask anyone who's played the current competitive format lately, the format's actually not too bad, and it's weird to think that when True King of all calamities is played in one of the top decks of the format, but that almost gave rise to some of these other control decks existing, and it's almost because True King of all calamities is in the format that you have these powerful trap-oriented decks like Eldritch that are also at tier 1 and are able to compete because they just pair so well together. But I feel like it's time that True King of all calamities makes its way onto the forbidden list. This card is just so degenerate and so unhealthy, and yes, while a tier 1 meta strategy could still exist even without it, it is the deck's main win condition. Phantom Rage has been legal for how long now? I mean, we've been dealing with Virtual World for months after months on end, and it's been winning months after months, although by Konami standards, the only events that matter are the ones that are officially sanctioned, so everything else up to that point is pretty much irrelevant. But I mean, for the most part, Virtual World has just been the best or like second best deck for the past 5 months, and I think if there's something to hit, it's probably going to be Calamities. One interesting scenario that could play out is that Calamities doesn't get banned at all and actually gets limited instead. Now, what would that do? That would allow Virtual World to still exist in the competitive format, but what that does is that it actually removes the ability for Virtual World to go into multiple True King of all calamities, and that's where the deck can start to get really unhealthy for the game, because dealing with a single calamities isn't too bad, and as you've seen the rest of the metagame kind of revolve around Virtual World, they're accommodating that into their deck building. However, when you consider the fact that they can follow that up with another calamities, or on turn 1 can go double calamities, then yeah, that's where it gets a little bit out of hand. So by limiting calamities, it allows Virtual World to still exist in the competitive space, but then after that first calamities gets outed, there really isn't going to be that fallback boss monster for the deck, and they're going to have to rely on the rest of their tools to be able to win those games. Even when you go into the side deck in games 2 and 3 against Virtual World, it doesn't seem nearly as much of an uphill battle, because a lot of the cards in the side deck can help combat stuff like calamities, so I don't really think it's like too bad, but I still don't think that justifies the card existing in the game, at least at 3 copies, so I'm really hoping for 0, but I wouldn't be surprised if they just limit it. Continuing on with the limits, we of course have Firewall Dragon. Now, if you've been living under the rock the past few months, we have the brand new Ghosts of the Past set that's going to be released now, I believe in April. It was supposed to be March, but actually got delayed by a month, I believe, either to printing or shipping issues. Something happened and they had to delay the release. However, we do know that Firewall Dragon is in the set. This has been confirmed by official Konami accounts, so that's going to happen, and we do know that it's also going to have its errata that it received in the OCG. Now, we could have a little bit of a Makira the Destructor situation like we had before, where the card was legal even though its errata hadn't been officially updated in the database, which meant everyone was able to play Makira FDK for like 3 days. That was a disaster, and honestly, Firewall Dragon being legal with its pre-errata text is probably going to be a nightmare as well, so there's a bit of a grace period where that could happen. But is that a problem? No, not really. Just don't play in your remote dual local for that grace period until the text gets updated. I mean, the new errata on Firewall makes the card virtually unplayable in most instances unless you're playing like specifically a Cybers focused strategy, so you're not going to be having PTSD from that, don't you worry, it's going to be perfectly fine. Now, next up on my list is Heavy Metal Foes Electromite. Now, I actually called this on my last ban list prediction because we had not yet seen the release of Blazing Vortex, and you'd think to support the release of Metal Foes, they would release their best boss monster from the ban list, even if it was for a short period of time. That didn't come to fruition, but Blazing Vortex is not the greatest set, and And so if there's a way that they would want to help sell the set, and we know the ban list is a tool that Konami uses to help push product, then this is a good way to do that. Also, we are receiving a new pendulum-based archetype in the next deck building set, Ancient Guardian, and so again, Heavy Metal Foes Electromite's a generic support for pendulums, and this could be a way to help sell that set as well. So I think there's a lot of forces here that could align to see a return of Electromite, but I'm not exactly sure. There are also some logical decisions that Konami could make to be able to unban specific cards to actually bolster some of these more rogue tier strategies now, such as Salamangreat. They could bring back Mirage Stalio. With Orcus, they could bring back Harpor. Both of these decks are rogue at best, and even then, even if you give Salamangreat Mirage Stalio, even if you give Orcus Harpor, these decks are not going to become tier 1. It just makes them more viable in the current competitive climate, so that way people have more choices and more cards to experiment with, so that way we can help progress the meta a little bit more forward. Now, some of you might be thinking, but Cimo, what about Ben 10? Ben 10 is like the best card in Drytron, so why would you not say that that should get limited? Well, I actually don't have Ben 10 anywhere on this list, and good reason for it. Lightning Overdrive is the next core booster set now that we have the release of Blazing Vortex, and in that set is more support for Drytron. I don't think Drytron has been legal long enough for them to actually hit anything for the archetype, and so I actually believe that this time around Drytron is going to get a pass. Once Lightning Overdrive comes out, once we get the brand new Xyz monster, we might even get some of the OCG exclusives that we've yet to receive here in the TCG, which could bolster the deck even further. I think that just makes sense from a sales perspective that they would want to help sell those sets. And so yes, while a limitation on Ben 10 would at least reduce the consistency and the overall power of the deck by extension, I actually think they want to keep Drytron where it is because it helps sell some of these sets. And since we're on the topic of cards that should be limited, what about Red Eyes Dark Dragoon or Verte Anaconda? Well, yes, in the past I have advocated that these cards either get limited or banned, but it's weird, right? Because after the last ban list, a lot of people thought that because Dragoon didn't get hit, while some of the other best decks did, that like every single deck was going to be running Dragoon. And to be fair, Dragoon does bolster a lot of these more rogue tier decks to be able to compete with some of the top tier contenders, and it hasn't had nearly the effect as it did in the OCG. It's interesting that because of the more slower control-based format we find ourselves in, that Dragoon actually isn't as problematic as we thought it was. Now, I still think the card should be limited, but I actually don't think that that's going to happen. The only result that comes from limiting Dragoon to a single copy is that it reduces the consistency and potency in these decks that use Pot of Extravagance. So think about decks like the Necro Valley Turbo deck, or maybe like Guru Control. That just won the most recent Remote Duel Invitational. So yes, I mean, you should limit Dragoon, but at the same time, when it's helping rogue decks more than anything, and it doesn't really seem like it's a major problem in the format, I definitely think the card is one of the most broken cards ever created, and I think that it should most likely hit the limited list at the very least just as a precaution. I don't think that's going to happen. Crystron Halqifibrax is another card that people were crying out to be banned only a short while ago, and yes, I agree. I think the card should at least get limited at the very least just to prevent any sort of shenanigans, but I think the banning of Link Cross actually really helped here because without that huge payoff on Link Cross, then there isn't really a major incentive to play something like Crystron Halqifibrax. Look at the way the format's developed. There's only a couple decks at most that really take advantage of Halqifibrax, and they're not really top tier. So, I mean, I think the card is probably going to dodge yet another ban list, which is unfortunate because a lot of people want to see their best tuner monsters come back. But again, I think just like Dragoon, they should hit and limit the card because it's a preventative measure just so things don't get out of hand, depending on whatever hits they do make on this upcoming March list. Same thing goes for Gardragon Elpie, you know? It's just another card that is in a deck that isn't played nearly as much as it used to. Definitely on a rise, I would say, now that people have figured out the best way to play the deck in this more control-oriented format. Elpie's another card I just take issue with because I definitely feel like it limits card design from the perspective of dragons in general. Dragons have some of the strongest support in the game, and anytime you have a dragon that can be special summoned from the deck, or a dragon that has 1,000 or less attack that Elpie can link into, like, it automatically becomes Elpie food, and then just makes it so that you're going to streamline all of your combos directly through Elpie. But again, it's just played in Dragon Link for now, so is it really a problem? I don't know. This is a card that a lot of people feel that it should just be banned just because of how powerful the card is. but I just don't think Konami's going to touch it. But that's enough of the limited cards. Let's go ahead and move on to the semi-limits. Now, as longtime fans of the channel know, I absolutely despise the semi-limited list. I think it serves zero purpose. The only purpose for this list's existence is Destiny Hero Malicious, but even then, you could put it to 1 or 3 and just abolish this list entirely. But for some reason, Konami loves a semi-limited list, although they have been taking measures to reduce the amount of cards on the list, unless you're in the OCG and they have like a million cards on it. But I digress. Let's go ahead and start off with Called by the Grave. Doesn't this just seem like a Konami move? Called by the Grave has been all over the limited list, just like time and time again. It's gone to limited, to 2, to 3, back to 2. I think now that they just limited it recently, it's going to go back to 2 because that just seems like a Konami thing to do. But Called by the Grave might actually have a net positive effect overall for the game, because look at how graveyard oriented the game currently is. Think about how many different types of cards a Called by the Grave can stop, especially in a more graveyard focused metagame. It would take out Drytron, it would take out Eldritch, and it even can help take out hand traps for some of these other decks that are looking to be more aggressive or defensive. So actually bringing this card back may be a good thing for the game. I've also got Cursed Outland on the semi-limited list, and the only reason that I do is because the OCG has it on their list as well. Similar to them, we also have Eldritch as one of our top strategies, Zodiac Eldritch probably being the most prominent. Now, yes, a slight consistency hit to this deck wouldn't be the worst. It still means the deck is playable, but the biggest issue I take with this is that, is this the right hit? I mean, you could hit something like Scarlet Sanguine, which might be a little bit better, because compared to Outland, which isn't really searchable, Scarlet Sanguine's actually a main engine piece and gives the deck the degree of inevitability that makes it so difficult to deal with. And once you get those Elixir plus Golden Land cards in rotation, it becomes one of the strongest control decks because you can't outgrind the deck. So by reducing the number of Scarlet Sanguines, you reduce the number of ways to access cards like Golden Lord, you reduce the number of ways to get to more of your Golden Land cards, and so that might be the better hit, but I'm just going off the track record here and saying they might just follow the OCG. Now, my next hit is a card that I guarantee no one has on their list, but that is Danger Tsuchinoko. Now, you might be wondering why I have Tsuchinoko on here, and the reason is because of Ancient Guardians, because Tsuchinoko is the only reptile on the Forbidden and Limited list, and since this is a reptile-focused archetype, and Danger Tsuchinoko also kind of fits the bill when it comes to this deck, it can help get some of these new Abyss monsters into the graveyard. It gives you a monster on the field, so that way you can tribute it off for some of these effects. I don't know, maybe to get people excited about the new reptile archetype in Ancient Guardians, we'll get to see Konami actually move Tsuchinoko off the limited list. Again, that just seems like a Konami thing to do, because what the hell else would they give us back to be able to support this? Oh god, I really hope it's not That Grass Looks Greener. And lastly, for the semi-limits, I've got Dynamite Knight going to 2. Konami's been on this weird kick lately where they're slowly bringing back pieces of True Draco, and on the last list, they brought back True King's Return to 2, which did absolutely nothing, by the way, so I anticipate for the Unlimits, they're just going to move that to 3, and then they're going to move Dynamite Knight to 2, just to slowly give us the pieces back. I don't know why they just don't put both of these to 3. I guarantee you no one will play Draco, because guess what? Diagram is still limited, so good luck with that. However, we'll have to see what happens. And that's really it for my Banlist predictions. You know, honestly, I didn't think I'd be ever saying the format's in a good place when there's a True King of All Calamities Turbo deck as one of the best decks of the format, but I think this has actually given rise to the birth of control decks really having this renaissance and bringing them back into the game, slowing the game down to a degree, and allowing a lot of these other more roguish decks to be able to compete as well. My philosophy has always been that I want to see as many decks playable as possible to have a nice, healthy, diverse metagame, and since we're at a place in the game's history where we're actually relatively okay with how the game is, I think we check a few of the problem cards, but we actually bring back a lot of cards to help these other strategies be able to have a chance to compete at the very least, at least have a much wider breadth of decks to choose from, and then that way there's a much healthier diversity, people have more choices, and that way overall people are really happy. So guys, that's gonna wrap it up for my March 2021 Banlist predictions. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think and what your top picks are for what you might think gets banned, limited, semi-limited, or unlimited on this next upcoming ban list. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video informative, consider supporting me on Patreon for exclusive early one-day access to both the Yu-Gi-Oh! Progression series and the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! Thank you all so much for watching, and we will see you next time.